From Studio 19, I'm Jeff Allen Wolf, and it's definitely a world gone mad. Episode 246. Hello, Friday. Time for some predictions. Here we go. From James Carville. Trump will resign by Easter 2027. He has no earthly idea of what's coming in November. Every election cycle brings predictions. Most of them disappear faster than a New Year's gym membership because they're based more on wishful thinking than reality. Then every once in a while, somebody who spent a lifetime in politics says something so outrageous, you stop scrolling and think, wait, what? That's exactly what happened when James Carville predicted Donald Trump won't finish this term and will resign by Easter of 2027 because, according to James Carville, Donald Trump has no earthly idea what's waiting for him after the November midterm elections. James Carville may end up looking like a political genius. Or James Carville may end up looking like the guy who confidently predicted the Arizona Cardinals were finally winning the Super Bowl. Politics has a remarkable ability to embarrass everybody eventually. But James Carville's prediction raises a much bigger question. What would actually have to happen for Donald Trump to resign? Forget politics for a moment, okay? Let's look at Donald Trump's history. Trump has survived investigations, 2 impeachments, indictments, civil lawsuits, criminal convictions, daily predictions of his political demise, questionable assassination attempts, and approximately 14,000 cable news panels announcing, "This time we finally got him." Now, at this point, if a meteor landed on the White House lawn, Trump would probably walk outside, point at it, blame Joe Biden, accuse CNN of exaggerating the size of the crater, and schedule a rally for Saturday. Whatever else you think about Donald Trump, voluntarily walking away has never exactly been part of the job description. That's why James Carville's theory depends almost entirely on what happens after the midterms. If Democrats have a huge night in November, Republicans suddenly discover they have principles again. Funny how that works. Washington loyalty lasts exactly as long as the polling numbers. The same politicians who've been standing shoulder to shoulder with Donald Trump could suddenly start polishing their resumes after the next election. Committee investigations could ramp up. Pressure could build. Republicans could start worrying more about saving themselves than defending Donald Trump. But even if every one of those things happened, none of it automatically leads to Donald Trump resigning. That would be completely out of his character. History actually points in the opposite direction. Every time somebody declares the walls are finally closing in, Trump somehow finds another door. We've heard the walls are closing in so many times, I'm beginning to think Trump lives inside a Home Depot. Every time critics announce it's finally over, somehow the story changes. The headlines shift, and Trump is back in the middle of the conversation. Love that reality or hate it, that's been the pattern for the better part of a decade. It's one of the reasons Democrats become so frustrated. They keep expecting the final chapter. Trump keeps showing up with another sequel nobody ordered. Now, could James Carville be seeing something the rest of us aren't seeing yet? Absolutely. People who've spent decades in politics sometimes recognize trends before everybody else does. Experience matters, but experience also doesn't make anyone immune from making spectacularly bad predictions. Politics humbles experts on a regular basis, especially when the subject is Trump. Excuse me, dealing with a little bit of a cold here. Predicting Trump's political future has become one of the fastest ways to end up explaining why your prediction didn't quite work out the way you thought it would. That's why I find this particular story fascinating. Not because I'm convinced Trump resigns, not because I'm convinced James Carville is wrong. I'm fascinated because somebody with James Carville's experience looked at everything happening right now, reached a conclusion that almost nobody else is willing to make. Carville is either seeing the political earthquake before everyone else, or Carville is about to remind us that even legendary political strategists sometimes swing so hard they miss the ball entirely. So let me ask you, the Wolfpack, who's right? Is James Carville seeing something the rest of us don't? Or is Trump about to do what Trump has spent the last decade doing? Refuse to leave the stage, no matter who's trying to drag him off it? Because if the last 10 years have taught us anything, betting against Trump has been about as reliable as trusting gas station sushi. And everyone needs to remember that the only American president ever to resign was, of course, Richard Nixon, because of Watergate. And if Donald Trump ever did resign, J.D. Vance would become president. Which makes what J.D. Vance just said about Richard Nixon a little more interesting. Pay attention, listen to this. This is Vance talking, okay? Vance was speaking at the Nixon Presidential Library in California when he argued Richard Nixon's reputation deserves a second look. According to Vance, if Watergate happened today, it wouldn't even dominate the news for very long. In fact, Vance joked, it'd probably be a 12-hour story before everybody moved on to the next outrage. That's an amazing sentence when you stop and think about it. Breaking into your opponent's headquarters like Nixon did, covering it up, lying about it, abusing the power of the presidency is now apparently competing with celebrity divorces and cat videos for airtime, according to Vance. Then Vance took it a step further. He argued, smiling, he argued Richard Nixon wasn't really brought down by Watergate, as much as by what Vance called the deep state. Here we go again. According to Vance, many of the same institutions that brought down Richard Nixon later tried to do the same thing to Donald Trump, of course. It's fascinating watching history get the software update treatment, take an event everybody learned about in school, install a new operating system, reboot the narrative, and suddenly the villains become the victims, and the victims become supporting characters. Apparently, history now comes with a restore factory settings button, except somebody replaced the factory. Now look, Watergate wasn't some anonymous internet rumor or a conspiracy cooked up on social media at 3 o'clock in the morning by a guy whose profile picture is an eagle wearing sunglasses. Republicans investigated Watergate. Journalists investigated it. Courts investigated it. Members of Richard Nixon's own administration testified. The evidence piled up until even many Republicans concluded Richard Nixon couldn't survive politically, right? That's why Richard Nixon resigned. Not because aliens in the deep state were hiding behind filing cabinets waiting to overthrow a presidency, like Vance claims. My apologies to the Wolfpack. What really caught my attention is the timing in what Vance said. Right after Carville predicted Trump would resign, Vance, who's first in line to become president, is arguing that the only president who actually did resign was really the victim of the system, instead of the architect of his own downfall. That's not just a history lesson. That's a political message from Vance. Maybe that's where we're headed now. Every scandal is really somebody else's conspiracy. Every investigation is automatically illegitimate. Every institution is corrupt the moment it reaches a conclusion you don't like. If that's the new rule, then accountability becomes impossible because nobody's ever responsible for anything. There's always another invisible villain somewhere behind the curtain pulling imaginary strings. History deserves better than that. You could debate Richard Nixon's accomplishments. You can debate Richard Nixon's failures. But pretending Watergate would have barely made the news today says a lot more about our politics than it does about Richard Nixon. And maybe that's the most revealing part of J.D. Vance's entire argument. To bring all of this full circle, Wolfpack, maybe Carville is completely wrong. Maybe Trump finishes his term without breaking a sweat. But isn't Vance's timing fascinating? On one hand, you've got Carville saying the political pressure after November could become so overwhelming that Donald Trump resigns. On the other hand, you got Vance, the man who immediately becomes president if that ever happened. He's standing at the Nixon Library arguing the only president who actually resigned was basically the victim of the system. What are the odds? It's almost like somebody looked at American history and said, you know what this needs? A director's cut version with an entirely different ending. Maybe it's all a coincidence. Maybe it isn't. But if Donald Trump really is about to face the kind of political pressure James Carville predicts, J.D. Vance has already started reminding everyone that Richard Nixon shouldn't be remembered as a president who resigned because of Watergate, but as someone who was supposedly brought down by forces behind the scenes. That's one heck of a conversation to start before the movie even gets to the third act. Whether it's strategic messaging, remarkable timing, or just political serendipity, I'll leave that to you, Wolfpack. But one thing's for sure, Washington isn't just rewriting tomorrow's headlines anymore. It's auditioning new writers for yesterday's history. That's my insight today into a world gone mad. If you've enjoyed the podcast, found it informative, maybe got a laugh or two, please contribute to keeping it around. I'm Jeff Allen Wolf. This is A World Gone Mad. I'll be back Monday. Until then, I urge you, the Wolfpack, remain skeptical. Question everything. Please don't lose hope. And most of all, stay alert.
There is chaos in the world. Can't you see?